So Uprising is right around the corner, and all of the cards have recently been uploaded to FabDB so we can start that brewing goodness. Now, about a week or so ago, I posted a video talking about some ideas for playing Iyslander and kind of different ways of managing your hand, etc. It'll be up here in the corner. And so I thought I would do a follow-up video now that we have the cards to go through my version 1 Iyslander deck tech. Anyways, let's get stuck into the video. Now, before we move on to the deck tech, I'd like to ask you all to please consider subscribing to the channel. I make a whole ton of Flesh and Blood videos talking about the game itself, talking about news, talking about things going on in the community. It's loads of fun, and if you like Flesh and Blood, I think this might be the channel for you. Anyways, let's get into the deck tech. So this deck is going to revolve around Iyslander Stormbind, the new ice wizard from Uprising. Now, Iyslander was first released in Everfest, however this is the first time that we have a CC adult Iyslander hero to play with, and the ability is exactly the same. The ability reads, if it's not your turn, you may play blue non-attack action cards from your arsenal as though they were an instant. Whenever you play an ice card during an opponent's turn, create a frostbite under their control. Now, I did, as I said back at the start of this video, I made a whole video on Iyslander and how I feel that Iyslander's hand should be managed, and like the strategies for blocking, the strategies for what cards they put in arsenal. So not to go over that video again, but ultimately what we're going to try and do is take advantage of this Iyslander ability as much as possible, and we're going to do it using 0 cost blues wherever possible. So the weapon that we're going to be using for Iyslander is her weapon from Everfest, the Kraken's Aethervein. Now, Kraken's Aethervein is a once per turn instant that costs 3 resources that says deal 1 arcane damage to target opposing hero, draw a card for each arcane damage dealt this way. Ultimately, we're not aiming to do this every single turn, i.e. your opponent's turn and yours, since it's an instant. We're really looking to kind of use this to punish our opponent for if they have nothing left in their hand at the end of turn, and we happen to have an extra blue floating around and we can just ping for 1, draw a card. That's really it. So anyways, let's move on to the equipment. Now, for the equipment I've chosen, I'll go through them all and then I'll tell you exactly what the loadout is for each hero or matchup that you might face. So first is the Alluvian Constellas. It is the new legendary wizard chess piece. It says the first time Alluvian Constellas prevents arcane damage each turn. If it has less than 4 energy counters, you may put an energy counter on it. And as an instant, you can remove 2 energy counters from Alluvian Constellas. The next staff ability you activate this turn costs 3 less, and it has Arcane Barrier 1. So this is going to soak up arcane damage, give us counters, and make our staff free. I'll move on to the use cases later, but for now, let's continue through the rest of the gear. Next, we have Coat of Frost. It is an ice chess piece from Tales of Aria with an action that says destroy Coat of Frost, create a frostbite token under target hero's control with go again. Pretty simple, pretty normal. Anyone who's drafted or played Tales of Aria will probably have a ton of these, but yeah, it's pretty standard for this type of deck. Now, onto the headpiece, we're going to be using the Coronet Peak. It is a new legendary headpiece from Uprising, and it has an action, costs 3 resources that says target hero discards a card unless they pay 1. Ultimately, this card is going to be used if we have a bad hand. We can just pitch a blue and make our opponent essentially get rid of a card from their hand. It's a nice disruptive effect, and it will help smooth out bad hands if we draw something that's not kind of favorable for the matchup we're playing. Next, we're going to use Iron Rot Gauntlet, a common card from Welcome to Wrath that just defends for 1 and then goes away. Same with the legs, we're going to use Iron Rot Legs. There is a reason behind this, trust me. We're also going to have some Null Rune Boots with us that just has Arcane Barrier 1. Again, this will make sense. We have Spellfray Gloves. As far as I'm aware, these only came in the Blitz decks from Monarch. I got mine in the Chain Blitz deck, but I think that some other Blitz decks might have it as well. I'm not 100% sure. But the final equipment piece that we're going to be using are the Storm Striders. It has an instant, it costs 1, you destroy it, and you can play your next wizard non-attack action card this turn as though it were an instant, and it has Arcane Barrier 2. Now, that loadout doesn't look like the standard loadout for any type of wizard we've ever seen before. Kano usually has a pretty locked in gear set, but the one thing I was trying to keep in mind when I was putting this deck together is that this is not Kano. Every facet of my being just wanted to build one big combo and have Storm Striders pop off at the end of turn. Ultimately, we won't be doing that. We are not going to be destroying Storm Striders in this to get that ability. We're going to be using it for Arcane Barrier 2. So all of the gear here will be split into 3 different groups. There's 3 different matchups that we will have different gear sets for. Let's go through those now before we move on to the deck proper. So in the Kano matchup, ultimately, I know I said this deck isn't Kano, but people are going to still play Kano Kano. He got a few new toys in this set, and he also did really good in the Pro Tour. So yeah, I think that Kano is something we're gonna have to keep in mind whenever we're playing this deck. I do think the matchup sounds favourable, but with some testing we'll see. But the loadout for this will be the Alluvian Constellas, the Coronet Peak, the Spellfray Gloves, and the Stormstriders. The reason for this loadout is that the Stormstriders gives us Arcane Barrier 2, and the Alluvian Constellas gives us Arcane Barrier 1, allowing us to pitch a blue and block 3 Arcane. Now, if someone is playing Kano these days, they're going for a big combo. They're probably going to be playing Aether Wildfire to try and just completely set the board alight and kill you in like one fell swoop. That's where the Spellfray Gloves comes in. You want to make sure you can pitch 3 to activate all of your Arcane Barrier, and then you can go ahead, drop your Spellfray Gloves. Hopefully you still have something in Arsenal, so you can throw a little Frostbite in there as well to make it cost a bit more. That disruption should make that Kano combo really, really annoying to deal with, and you should also be able to deal with that Aether Wildfire as soon as it appears on the board. There should be no setup required. You should always have a blue in hand so that you can activate your Arcane Barrier. Your Spellfray Gloves will pop straight away, meaning that you can block an extra arcane damage. The Kano combo is going to be really difficult to get through this gear loadout, and that's ultimately the reason why that it's here. So next is the gear loadout for any arcane dealing hero that is not a wizard. Ultimately someone who's going to be pinging small like 1 and 2 arcane damages at you. This is going to be the loadout for them. So it's going to be the Alluvian Constellas, the Coronet Peak, Spellfray Gloves, and the Null Rune Boots. The reason why that these are here, you could probably swap the Spellfray Gloves with Iron Rock Gloves depending on how you feel your matchup is going, but ultimately the Spellfray Gloves are only there to give you an extra arcane barrier should you feel kind of short on resources. Other than that, you're going to have the Alluvian Constellas there as your main source of Arcane Barrier. So you want to be using the Arcane Barrier on Alluvian Constellas as much as possible to get those counters up. I know it has a maximum of 4, which is nice because you can kind of build up extras if you don't find like an opportunity to use your staff. However, essentially every time you get 2, at instant speed, you can ping off 1 arcane damage at the right time to draw yourself a card. I can't think of a better wizard chess piece at the moment in an arcane matchup than this. The only reason why the Null Rune Boots are there is just in case someone decides to come in with the Rosetta Thorn for 2 and 2, and you really feel strongly about blocking that second arcane damage. But yeah, if you're not too worried about the second arcane damage, you can swap out the Spellfray Gloves and the Null Rune Boots for the Iron Rot just to give you a bit of extra block. But ultimately, yeah, the Alluvian Constellas is the main part here. And for everyone else, the gear loadout is the Coat of Frost, the Coronet Peak, the Iron Rot Gauntlets, and the Iron Rot Legs. There's no point in having the Alluvian Constellas in there if you don't have to deal with arcane damage, so you may as well put on the Coat of Frost. We are going to be adding a lot of Frostbites, and those Frostbites are going to be giving us extra arcane whenever we get into the deck proper. So the ability to just add an extra one out of the blue is really, really nice, especially if you have like nothing in your hand and you just want to throw a little Frostbite on there just to annoy your opponent. It does great. Coronet Peak, as I say, if you just want to pitch a blue in order to get a card out of your opponent's hand, maybe you only have 1 card left in hand, you don't have an attack, you're not sure what to do, this is a great option. It's one of those kind of always in the bank type of options that you can use whenever you need to, and the Iron Rot just gives us 2 extra health, essentially, just 2 block. So one more point of note before we move on to the deck proper, I did not include the Conduit of Frostborn, the brand new ice arm pieces from Uprising. They have an instant which says destroy Conduit of Frostborn. The next card you play this turn with an effect that deals arcane damage gains, when this deals arcane damage to a hero, destroy a frozen card in their arsenal. We are not going to be freezing cards in Arsenal that often. We do freeze some cards as part of this deck, but we don't do it reliably enough in Arsenal to have the our arm piece taken up by this instant that isn't really going to be used. I know it has Quell, but I don't really like Quell in this deck. Our resources are pretty much spoken for most of the time, so ultimately that's the reason why that I decided to go for the Iron Rot instead of this. Ultimately, if I don't need the instant on the Conduit of Frostborn, I may as well just use something that blocks for 1 for free rather than makes me pay for 1. If I have to use Quell to block arcane damage, I'm going to have my Alluvian Constellas equipped, and I'm going to block using those instead so that I can get the counter. So yeah, that's the reason why that this isn't included in this deck. The other consideration for this deck as well is to not include the Stormstriders as part of the non-wizard matchup. I know that it seems like the standard kind of thing to be like, oh, I'll use the wizard boots against other arcane heroes like Briar or Viserai. However, the problem there is that that has Arcane Barrier 2. Now, the downside of having Arcane Barrier 2 is that if you have to block a Rosetta, yes, I know it's tempting to use Arcane Barrier 2 to block the 2 arcane damage, but again, you're gonna want to block the arcane damage, always with Alluvian Constellas, to make your staff free every second turn. So in matches with the Rosetta Thorn, if we did have the Storm Striders, we would have to pitch 3 in order to block the 2 arcane damage, because we would want to get the counter on Alluvian Constellas, but then we would have to activate an extra Arcane Barrier 2 to soak up the 1 extra arcane damage. Null-Rune Boots made way more sense here, especially because we're not going to be using the instant ability on Storm Striders, so if we don't need it, there's no point in paying extra for Arcane Barrier that we're not going to use. And for the absolute rare occasion where you do need to block an extra arcane damage, that's why we have our Spellfray Gloves. Anyways, onto the deck proper, and we'll start with the reds. Now, in this deck, we have 27 reds. It's out of a deck of 71 total. We have 11 cards that would make up our sideboard, so we will be running a core 60, and we'll be adding on a few extras for specific matchups, but I'll talk about sideboarding later. First, let's go through the reds. So the first red we're including is 3 copies of Aether Hail, a brand new Ice Wizard action from Uprising, which for 1 resource deals 4 arcane damage to any target. Now, the any target part of that is fantastic because it means that we can attack dragons and all of the new crazy stuff that's going on in this set. But 1 resource for 4 arcane damage is pretty standard economics in the world of wizardry damage. And it's an ice card, meaning we can use it for fusion for some of the cards that'll be coming up later on. Next, we have 3 copies of Aether Icevein. It is an elemental wizard action that costs 3 resources, and it has an ice fusion ability. It says deal 5 arcane damage to any target. If Aether Icevein was fused and deals damage to a hero, they discard a card unless they pay 2 resources. This is fantastic, since the way that we're going to manage our hand, remember that other video that's up in this corner? Since the way we're managing our hand means we're always going to keep a ice blue card in hand to arsenal, hopefully if everything goes according to plan, we will be able to ice fuse this all the time, because we need to hold that card in hand in order to arsenal it. So for 3 resources, 5 arcane damage, and discarding an extra card from your opponent's hand, fantastic value. This card was an auto include the second I saw it. Next, we have 3 copies of Encase. This card was already spoiled before in the very early Uprising Iyslander spoiler thing. It's a 0 cost red with an ice fusion that says deal 3 arcane damage to any target. If Encase was fused and deals damage to a hero, freeze that hero and all equipment they control until the start of your turn. This again is fantastic. It is a 0 cost, and again with the fusion, which is going to be going off nearly always, we will be dealing 3 arcane damage for no resources, and also we will be freezing the hero and all equipment. That means no Crown of Seeds, that means no any of those lightning gloves that I can't remember the name of. That means no tunic, no nothing. That it all goes away. It's fantastic. It turns off hero abilities, which can really put a dampener on a lot of decks. So the next card that we're going to include are 3 copies of Freezing Point, a 3 cost red that is an elemental wizard action. It has an ice fusion, and it says deal 5 arcane damage to target hero. If Freezing Point was fused, instead deal X arcane damage, where X is 5 plus the number of frostbites, ice affliction, and frozen cards they control. Even if you don't have any frostbites or anything like that on your opponent at this particular time, it doesn't matter. The 3 for 5 is still nice. However, if you do and you manage to get this off at the right time, this can deal serious amounts of arcane damage. 5 damage is nothing to be snuffed at. Anything that costs 3 or less is going to just involve pitching 1 card, which is nice. We're always going to have blues floating everywhere. But yeah, this card in the right condition could do massive arcane damage. Next is 3 copies of Frosting, a brand new Ice Wizard action that costs 0 and it deals 3 arcane damage to any target. If you have to defend really heavily and you're left with only 2 cards in your hand, i.e. 1 to play, 1 to arsenal, remember that other video that I keep talking about? 3 arcane damage to any target is not bad for 0 resources really, so yeah. And it's an ice card, so it works as fusion material. On to the next red, we're including 3 copies of Ice Bolt, a brand new Ice Wizard action that costs 2 resources. It's a red and it deals 5 arcane damage to any target. It is essentially the Voltic Bolt of Ice Wizards, but instead it deals damage to any target instead of target hero. So again, for all the other any target points that we've mentioned before, this is perfect for just dealing raw arcane damage. Next we have Polar Cap. We're including 3 copies of this. It is a 2 cost red elemental wizard action. It has an ice fusion and it says deal 4 arcane damage to any target. If Polar Cap was fused and deals damage to a hero, create a frostbite token under their control. We're getting a frostbite for ice fusion. It means that your opponent, if they don't want to deal with that frostbite, they're gonna have to pony up and stop all 4 arcane damage, unless your opponent's playing AB4 and has the resources to pay for it. most likely this is going to go through. Next, we have 3 copies of Singe. It is a 1-cost red that says deal 1 arcane damage to target hero and up to 3 target allies they control. Spoilers, this is going in the sideboard to deal with all those Ether Ashwings, those little 1-cost dragons that have arcane barrier that are going to ruin my day. This is a way of unruining that day and dealing with any number of them that are floating up. If they want to keep the Ether Ashwings around, they're going to have to pony up the resources to pay for it. If not, then all of them will just go poof. And the last reds that we're including in the deck are 3 copies of Succumb to Winter. It is a 3-cost red elemental wizard action. It has an ice fusion component and it says deal 5 arcane damage to any target. If Succumb to Winter was fused and targets a hero, destroy a frozen card in their arsenal. If it was fused and targets a frozen ally, destroy that ally. Ultimately, the fusion in this isn't going to be the most important thing in the world. As I said, we're not reliably freezing arsenal cards, but if we manage to freeze an ally, then we can target it and destroy that ally. Bang, your dragons are gone. And next, let's move on to the yellows. This is going to be the quickest part because we only have 2 yellows in the entire deck and they're in the sideboard, so you'll probably not be drawing them very often. Ultimately, this is for the longer matchups or anything where you feel you're going to have a chance of being fatigued. It's not the best fatigue strategy in the world, but hey, who knows, it might pull you out of a hole. So we're including 2 copies of Remembrance. It is a 0-cost yellow from Welcome to Wrath that says shuffle up to 3 action cards from your graveyard into your deck, banish Remembrance. This will just get 3 of your cards back. Since it's a wizard, all of the cards in this deck are non-attack actions, so you'll be able to just pick 3 cards and just put them straight back in. If you feel like you need a lot of blues, go ahead and take them. If you get it early in the game and you want to put pressure on, you feel you need some of them reds back, then just get some of the reds back. But ultimately, the deck is kind of tight, running at a core 60 plus a few extras, so maybe 62, 63 cards. So putting on some extra Remembrances could kill a hand if it comes out. It doesn't pitch for 3, it doesn't really do anything other than get stuff back. It's really only useful in the late game. So yeah, it's there for fatigue matchups that you can just pitch it away early. Hopefully it doesn't ruin your hand when it comes out and it becomes really useful later in the game. Anyways, on to the blues. This is where the meat of this deck is going to be because the blues are going to do most of the lifting. It's going to involve us playing on our opponent's turn. It's going to involve us making frostbites for our opponent. And it's going to be ultimately what we're going to be using to pay for everything as well because that's what blues do. There are 42 blues in total in this deck. That is an insane number of blues. But remember, blues are not just here to pay for things. Blues are also here to allow us to play a card on our opponent's turn. So that's why we have so many. As I go through the cards, I'll mention which ones are there for, playing reasons and which ones are there for, attacking your opponent reasons, and hopefully the strategy will become a bit more clear as we work through. So first, we include 3 copies of Ether Hail. We also have the reds on there, but the blue version costs 1 and deals 2 arcane damage to any target. Not a bad option if you just want to ping some damage at a target, or if you just want to fire it at an opponent if you get an all blue hand. Next, we have 3 copies of Ether Icebane. We also include the red version of this, but the blue is a 3-cost blue with an ice fusion component that says deal 3 arcane damage to any target. If Ether Icebane was fused and deals damage to a hero, they discard a card unless they pay 2 resources. They're going to need to pony up for the AB3 on this. If they don't have AB3 and one goes through, great, you're getting extra cards out of their hand. Fantastic. Next is the first card that we're going to be using from our arsenal. It is Arctic Incarceration. It's a 0-cost blue, which is exactly what we want to be putting in our arsenal at all times at the end of our turn. It's an ice action that says create a frostbite under target hero's control. Because this is an ice card, it's also going to trigger Iyslander's ability, so this blue is actually going to trigger 2 frostbites. Fantastic. This is exactly what we want in this deck because we're going to be making use, spoilers, of Iyslander's specialization later on to use those frostbites to deal damage, but we'll get to that. We're nearly there. Next is another 0-cost blue. We're including 3 of those in the deck, and it is Blizzard, a 0-cost blue which says target attack loses and can't gain go again unless the attacking hero pays 2 resources. It's an ice card, so it can be used for fusion. It's a blue, so it can be played in our opponent's turn. It's 0, so it fits our strategy from earlier. Perfect card. Next is Channel the Bleak Expanse. It is a 1-cost blue ice action aura. It has go again. It says heroes can't draw cards, reveal cards, or search decks from effects. And it has the Channel Ice, which says at the beginning of your end phase, put a flow counter on Channel the Bleak Expanse, then destroy it unless you put an ice card from your pit zone on the bottom of your deck for each flow counter on it. So it ticks up by 1 each turn, and at the end of turn, you need to have that many cards in your pit zone in order to keep it alive. If you don't, it goes away. Ultimately, if you only only get 1 turn out of this, that's not the worst. I mean, if you're going up against other elemental heroes, this will prevent them from fusing. If you're going up against cards that play Crown of Seeds, then they're not going to be able to draw from Crown of Seeds. Yeah, it's just another disruption card, really. Sometimes it's pretty bad, depending on the matchup, but against the right hero, it could, you know, really disrupt your opponent's next turn. Next, we have Cold Snap. This is the only 1 cost that we'll be including in our arsenal cards, ultimately because it draws a card when played from arsenal, so you get that card back. We're going to be including 3 copies of this in our deck, and it says target hero may pay a resource. If they don't, freeze a card in their arsenal or an ally they control until the start of your next turn. This could work really well with the whole destroy a frozen card from earlier, but ultimately they're gonna pay the resource. It's either gonna take a resource off their floating total, or it's gonna, hopefully, if you're playing against Fire or any of the other like heavy, wide, loads of red card decks, hopefully it'll pull a red out of their hand. But the best part about it is, if you pitch a blue in order to play it on your opponent's turn, it's gonna end up drawing you a card since you're gonna play it from your arsenal every single time. Then that means that you're gonna have 2 extra floating resources in order to do something funny if you really want to. But the main thinking behind this isn't the 2 extra resources. They could be nice, but it is to try and sort out maybe a bad hand. If you draw maybe a hand that's full of reds, maybe you don't want those reds right now, or if you have lots of blues and maybe you're searching for a red in order to do some damage next turn, you can pitch that card away, play Cold Snap from arsenal, and then draw another card from the top of your deck. So it kind of acts sort of like a Sink Below in that way. Someone mentioned the drawing a card part in the comment section of the last video, which was great, so I felt that including it was the best option. Next is the card that's going to do all of the heavy lifting in this. This is where the snowball effect, pun intended, is going to happen, and we're going to deal some serious regular damage to our opponent. So this is Frost Hex. It is a 3-cost blue Iyslander specialization. It's an affliction, so it's an aura that you play under your opponent's control, and it says frostbites you control have at the beginning of your end phase. This deals 1 arcane damage to you. This could be weird if played against Prism, because essentially you're giving Prism an aura she can attack you with, but she's gonna go live in Legend soon, so who cares? The key part about this aura though is that there's no way of destroying it on the card. It doesn't go away at the end of anyone's turn. It doesn't have flow counters or any of that madness. It stays there as for the rest of the game, and you can have 3 of them in your deck. So if you have 3 of these out, each frostbite is going to be dealing 3 arcane damage. Well, it's 1 instance of arcane damage 3 times, so they can really seriously pay for tons of arcane barrier if they want. But this is going to reach critical mass if you can get 2 or 3 frostbites on your opponent by the end of their turn. This is going to be dealing serious arcane damage on top of the arcane damage that you'll be dealing to them on their turn. Every time you see a Frost Hex, doesn't matter what you have in your hand, play this every single time. If you follow the strategy in the last video, again the one that I keep touting, you will have the resources to pay for it. You'll also be able to put something in arsenal. You'll be able to block with only 1 card on your opponent's turn, but trust me, the critical mass of arcane damage you'll be doing after you get 3 of these out will be more than worth taking some damage on your opponent's turn. Anyways, let's move on. We're about halfway through the blues at the minute. We are going to include 3 copies of Frosting. We have the red in the deck as well, but it is a 0-cost blue for 1 arcane damage. Again, 0-cost blue, put it in the arsenal, fire that bad boy out, 1 arcane damage, 1 frostbite. Simple. Yeah. Next we have 3 copies of Hypothermia, another 0-cost blue, so we're going to play it from arsenal to get that frostbite from Iyslander, and it is another affliction. We play it onto our opponent's side of the board, and it says attacks you control can't gain go again. At the beginning of your end phase, destroy Hypothermia. Yes, cards that already have go again don't lose go again, so it ultimately will just stop your opponent if they haven't used their Snapdragon Scalers, or if they're thinking about doing something funny to go for a really wide turn. But yeah, ultimately it's a 0-cost blue that we can use as fusion material on our own turn, and we can use it as a free frostbite on our opponents. Next we have Ice Eternal, another Iyslander specialization. We're going to include 3 copies of this in the deck, and it is a XX Ice Eternal cost, meaning that we can pay whatever we want, and the value of X will be used in the card text. So it has an Ice Fusion ability. It says create X frostbite tokens under target hero's control. Then if Ice Eternal was fused, deal arcane damage to that hero equal to the number of frostbites they control. Unbelievable. We are gonna fuse this every single time because we're gonna have cards in our hand that we're gonna be arsenaling to, you know, trigger Iyslander's ability, as we keep saying. So we're gonna have the fusion material. Even if we pay 4 for it, just pay the extra whatever you need for it. you're going to be creating maybe 2 frostbites. Those frostbites are going to deal some arcane damage. Then if they have to pay for them the next turn, great. If they don't pay for them, then your frost hexes are going to be using them to deal arcane damage. Ultimately, this is a nice way of just burning whatever extra resources you have in your hand in order to create half that number of frostbites and do some arcane damage. Unbelievable. Great. It's an Iyslander specialization, so it was definitely going to end up in the deck. We only have 4 more cards left. We have 3 copies of Insidious Chill. It is a 3-cost blue ice action aura. It says Insidious Ice enters the arena with 3 frost counters on it. When it has no frost counters on it, destroy it. Whenever you ice fuse, remove a frost counter from Insidious Chill. If you do, target hero discards a card unless they pay 2 resources. This is unbelievable. It gives us 3 instances of getting a card out of our opponent's hand. If it is an opponent who draws an all red hand, unbelievable, they're discarding one. If not, they're going to pitch a yellow or a blue in order to try and stop this, and we get to do it 3 times. Fantastic. This is such a good disruption aura, and we play 3 of them, meaning that we're going to activate this ability 9 times. Fantastic. And if you stack them, if you can get them a few turns within each other so that you have 1 and 2 on the board, fantastic. So good. This was, as soon as I saw this, I definitely knew I wanted to play it. The third to last blue that we're going to include are 3 copies of Polar Cap. It is a 2-cost blue elemental wizard action. Has an ice fusion ability, says deal 2 arcane damage to any target. If Polar Cap was fused and deals arcane damage to a hero, create a frostbite token under their control. Great damage on our own turn, and it also deals a frostbite to our opponent. Next, we have 3 copies of Succumb to Winter blue. We mentioned it before, we have the red version, but the blue version was too good to not include as well. It is a 3-cost blue, has an ice fusion component, and it deals 3 arcane damage to any target. If Succumb to Winter was fused and targets a hero, destroy a frozen card in their arsenal. If it was fused and targets a frozen ally, destroy that ally. Ultimately, it's just in case an opponent decides that they're going to let some damage through on other cards, that they end up getting something frozen that we can destroy. At least we have a card to take advantage of that and destroy them. If not, it's a 3-cost for 3 arcane damage. Not the best in terms of resources to arcane damage, but it's a blue, so we'll probably end up pitching it mostly. And the last card in the deck is Winter's Bite, a 0-cost blue ice action, so it's going to trigger Iyslander's ability, and it says target hero discards a card unless they pay a resource. Great, it's going to get a card out of our opponent's hand either way. Exactly what we need for this deck. So the first card in our sideboard are all 3 copies of Channel the Bleak Expanse. The reason being is because it says heroes can't draw cards, reveal cards, or search decks from effects. If you're going up against a hero that doesn't search, it doesn't reveal anything, no, they're not an elemental hero, there's no point. It's going to take up extra space. I don't really see a reason why it should be in there if you're not going to be taking advantage of the effect, so that's why it's on the sideboard. Hypothermia is exactly the same. It says attacks you control can't gain go again. If you're going up against someone like Oldhim or something where he doesn't get a lot of go again, yeah, there's not really a point in running this. Again, same as Channel the Bleak Expanse. If you're going up against a hero that you know is going to add a lot of go again, include it. If not, get it out. It's not doing anything for anybody. The other card in our sideboard, as we mentioned before, was Remembrance. It's only there for the fatigue matchup, so don't go crazy including it in matchups that you think aren't going to last that long. The next sideboard card that we have here is our 3 copies of Singe. Again, it only deals 1 arcane damage to target hero and up to 3 target allies that they control. This is just for Ether Ashwings. If you're up against any of the heroes that don't make Ether Ashwings, don't include it. It's not needed. It's not going to do anything for anybody. A red that costs 1 and deals 1 arcane damage is just not worth it. So yeah, that's very specific, but very needed in the matchups that it is needed. And as I mentioned at the start of this video, the rest of the sideboard is going to be taken up with every piece of gear that we have that's not called Coronet Peak. Coronet Peak is the only piece of gear that we have that's used in every single matchup. Every other piece of gear is matchup specific, which was laid out at the start of the video. And so that's the deck. Whenever I get my hands on more of the cards, I'm more than happy to play a whole bunch of games with anyone who wants to jam some Iyslander games. You can always get in contact with me on Twitter. More than happy to play test whenever I get my hands on Uprising. I cannot wait. I've got my pre-release on Saturday, so I'm going to be recording some of that, hopefully, to bring to you. As well as that, I've got my case on the way. I can't wait to open it. We'll record it. We'll have some fun. Hopefully, we get some ice cards. But yeah, hopefully you find this video useful. If you're looking forward to playing Iyslander and you've got some different ideas, I 100% want to hear from you. I want to really try and focus on some more control gameplay, because beforehand I played Kano, which was very kind of Boom. So this is something that feels slightly different for me, but also kind of familiar. And as I said at the start of the video, please consider subscribing. I do videos like this, as well as all sorts of other Flesh and Blood content a few times a week. So if you like Flesh and Blood, make sure to hit subscribe to see whenever I post a video. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.